I would like to discuss about the common misconception that faith and reason are enemies and are opposed. That believing in God means that you have to either choose a side of whether you are for faith or not for faith. However, in reality, they complement each other, in my opinion. Specifically, reason allows us to examine historical and textual evidence. Faith, personally, to me, is trust we placed in God once reason shows that trust is warranted. I like to think of it as like a relationship. You can gather facts about someone. You can grow your you kind of at a certain point after you have hung out or been with each other for a long time, you have to decide whether you're going to put your full trust with them. And faith is kind of like that step into personal relationship. God values this because love cannot be coerced. If we had absolute, irrefutable proof, we wouldn't have the freedom to truly love someone. And I believe that faith preserves that freedom specifically.
All right. So why is the Bible somewhat like an American anthology? Because, well, first of all, we define what American anthology is. American anthology is basically just a collection of a series of stories, typically think of it as a bunch of, if you've ever seen Tales from the Hood, it's a series of stories with an underlying theme or message, maybe not written all by the same people, but with a similar idea or reasoning or something they're trying to do. Typically not always exactly meant to be literal. So that's kind of what we see with a lot of the Old Testament. The Gospels are meant to be much more interpreted as this is a literal series of events, especially I believe it was Luke, where it's meant to be, this is my recounting of, based on my evidence that I procured over a couple of years, this is what has happened based on that. But not all of it's like that. So you have much like the old parts of the Old Testament, which is like Genesis, where it's not meant to be, the world was literally created in several days. It's meant to be more so, this is a story representing our way that we have a relationship with God. And that's kind of just a key idea. And that's kind of what we also is into the idea of what do we mean by when we say the Bible is true and most of it happened, air quotes. Well, realistically, it's not the Bible. That's not saying the Bible literally happened one for bar for bar. We're saying mostly this happens when we talk about the Old Testament, more specifically the New Testament. We say the Bible is reliable to what it originally said. We have old text from the Jewish old Jewish text that line up with what we currently have. We have evidence to believe that there is a reason that the Gospels currently are equal to what they originally were written, based on how early we have for the texts.
All right, so now we're going to get into the Gospels, and mainly their reliability and how Jesus ties into all that. So, to really begin, I would just like to really start off with the fact that the Gospels do have a genre, and in fact, they're more of an ancient biography type style, not exactly historical, giving exact dates. This happened at that time. It's more kind of like resembling ancient literature, portraying a character of a person through key events, speeches, and actions. And it has a term. It's called bios or vita, depending on which one you really feel like using today. And it's, again, like what I said before, represents ancient literature designed to portray the character of a person. And it's very much not just an accurate retelling of what happened. See, according to one source I really like called the Bart Ehrman blog, which I will be putting in my works cited, which you will definitely see. According to this writer, some modern biographies tend not only to inform but also explain, and they can also usually entertain, of course. And of course the Gospels are not exactly like this. They again give key events and such, and this also proves why they're also reliable as well. See, there are many instances in the Gospels where it shows, for example, I'd like to bring up the fact that Jesus was being crucified, and all the times and all the many different times where it shows him getting crucified, and all the times we're getting embarrassed and such. It wouldn't make sense for the writers of the Gospels to be putting all of it like this when it is God himself. And there are multiple attestations for different events in the Bible or the Gospels where many different events happen. And so in which we'll be talking about that more later, probably in the 4 E's. So I'd like to just explain, and this also all ties into why Jesus kind of must exist as a person. I'll give that over to Andy.
Yeah, so going off of that, there is historical evidence that Jesus was a real person because of the Romans can testify that Jesus was real. Jewish people can testify that Jesus was real, and Christians can also testify that Jesus was real. And being real doesn't mean anything, but he claimed to be God according to the Pharisees. And during his court case, he claimed that he was the Yahweh, and he claimed to be the king of the Jews. So they crucified him because of blasphemy for that. Although they tried to get him to commit blasphemy, he only claimed to be the Messiah. And in the early centuries of the world, the Messiah was supposed to be someone who was a warrior and supposed to defeat the Romans, and many people claimed to be the Messiah, and there were followers, but they never clearly defeated the Romans. And Jesus never defeated the Romans either, and that's why scholars believe he is not the Messiah, although he defeated the Romans through sin. And that's why we call him the Messiah.
Alright, so now we're going to be talking about the 1, 2, 3, 4 E's. We're going to be talking about the 4 E's. And so to begin, we're going to start with the execution, my favorite one. So to begin, I just like to talk about the criterion of embarrassment, which is essentially just they wouldn't have Jesus being executed, they wouldn't have Jesus being executed, all the apostles fleeing out of fear. It wouldn't really make sense for the writers to be doing that unless it really happened. Again, a school wouldn't really promote that they lost some massive game. They wouldn't promote that, So the fact that they are saying that Jesus died on that cross, the apostles fled, and all this happened, shows that it sort of must have happened. And I would also like to note, I have read in some sources that the darkness and earthquake that did fall after the crucifixion may or may not have happened. There are some sources saying that, on the day of his crucifixion, there was an eclipse that led to a darkness similar to what was said in the gospel at the crucifixion, and there was also an earthquake at that time. I mean, personally, with that, I am a little more torn, but I do feel the darkness does kind of show that, again, Jesus died on the cross and that the execution must have happened. And now, to begin with the second E, which is simply the empty tomb, which is, I feel like, one of the strongest points here, which is that the tomb was suddenly empty. So, the main point is that Jewish authorities say that the body was stolen, and that is simply enough to prove that the tomb was empty. See, Jewish authorities really have no reason to say that Jesus really exists, that Jesus really died, or that he's God or whatever. So again, it's just simply more powerful that even they say it, and thus it proves that tomb was indeed empty. See, it doesn't make sense. The apostles couldn't have really stolen them either, because again, the apostles were untrained fighters. They couldn't break the seal. They weren't strong enough to really get them out. So, and the Romans, they couldn't get them out either. And the Jewish authorities, they couldn't have done it either. So, there's really odd, again, Trent Horn believes that this sort of thing could not have happened through all the different parties. No reasonable party could have really stolen the body. And now I'm gonna lead into early accounts with Andy.
Yeah, so continuing with the 4 E's, we have early accounts, and this is where Jesus, as he rose from the dead, he went to see Mary Magdalene as his first person to see, and which is interesting because women were not trustworthy sources, and they would lie about things in court, and it would be not a great sign to have a woman testify on such a big account, such as Jesus rising from the dead. Therefore, it had to be some reason why she would do it. And we can also see early accounts with stories told after the resurrection. As early as 3 days after, there was information about having Jesus raised from the dead and the tomb being empty, and that seems reasonable because legends can't build up that fast, and they have to take time for it to be credible sources. And if it were in the moment, it would therefore be an eyewitness who, a real eyewitness was Paul, before Saul, who persecuted Christians, and as he went to the road to Damascus, he converted into Christian after he saw Jesus during his resurrection, saying, "Why do you persecute me, Saul?" And another eyewitness was Saint Thomas, who doubted that Jesus rose from the dead until he could feel the wounds in Jesus' body, therefore making it a credible source that Saint Thomas was, in fact, aligned with Jesus.
All right, so some background information of the Shroud of Turin. It's a 14-foot linen cloth kept in Italy from my research. It was first documented in the 14th century and is actually widely believed to be the burial cloth that Jesus used. If you observe it closely, you can see specific details that actually point to a depiction of Jesus. It kind of showcases a man with a beard, long hair, and wounds that directly match the description shown in the Gospels. This also includes dozens of scourge marks from Roman weapons, a cap of thorns, and nail wounds that went through the wrists that are also depicted in the story of Jesus being crucified. The cloth specifically is what there is from the first century, and what's striking about like the image itself is that it's like negative with no specific paint or pigmentation, and it's formed only on like the topmost fibers. So in today's like using modern technology, scientists can't exactly 100% replicate it to get a clear image. The carbon dating that suggested a medieval origin actually came from a repaired corner on the shroud, and later tests place it within like the first century. So while that is not like directly proof, the shroud offers a type of detailed observable evidence that kind of aligns with the Gospels and points to a death, and also perhaps a resurrection.
All right. So next time we are going to cover radiocarbonating of the Shroud of Turin. So one of the key ideas is you can use radiocarbonating to estimate the age of which an object is based on the radioactive decay of it. Basically, check how much of a certain compound is present of carbon, and then we say, okay, so the X amount must, it decays at X rate. We can assume that it must be this old. And so when we did that, we found that it was only from our sample at least. It was only roughly about 1,000-ish years, so we're relating back to like 10th or 11th century, which would directly contradict the whole "it is Jesus." The problem we do have with that is that we know that there was at one point a fire, and I believe Tyler covered this. There was at one point a fire that occurred near the shroud that caught in part the actual shroud itself, which burned part of it. But there's also a heavy belief that there was at least some attempt to reconstruct it. So that ends up giving us a area where there is new medieval aged cotton inside of it. And realistically, we will assume based on where we got it, there's a good chance that at the very moment is probably in that area where the new cotton was layered over and given that new layer. So you ended up get radiocarbon dating the new cotton, meaning it was no longer the like first century cotton or linen, whatever they used, which creates a potential false positive. So it's saying that it's giving you a wrong date. It does raise questions why they did not decide to go and just give a different corner or give multiple different areas if they want a truly accurate data. But there are other reasons. There's also a key idea of we don't actually know how the shapes on in actual specific details were actually given into the actual linen given their medieval context. Well, not medieval per se, but first century we assume if we go with that, because they're kind of complex. We've tried to do it similarly, and we have ideas, but none of them are particularly complete or fully accurate.
So, after looking at all the evidence from the Bible, the Gospels, the four E's, even the Shroud of Turin, I'm still slightly on the line. I can't deny that there's like something compelling here. The early creed, the empty tomb, the way that the apostles were willing to die for what they claim to have seen. Um, it makes me think that like something real happened, and the shroud, with its unexplainable image and wounds that match the gospel's description. It does make me wonder. Uh, Personally, for me, belief in like Jesus as like a real historical person, let alone as God, requires a sort of level of trust that I don't fully have yet. I do, in fact, do believe in a God. I think there's something beyond the physical world, and the reason for like my creation. But when it comes to like Jesus himself, I do need slightly more time, more evidence, maybe just a little bit more openness to fully committing to that as a fact. So overall, yeah, the place where I land is somewhere in the middle. Not entirely closed off, but I'm not like 100% convinced. But I still need to ask a few questions, and I'm still need to observe and take in all the evidence for myself. And I'm perfectly okay with that. I'll take this as a learning opportunity. I'm glad that this evidence was brought to me, and I had fun learning more about Jesus as a person, trying to prove that he actually was a real person.
Hello, I'm just gonna quickly give my reflection. This will only take a quick minute, so let's just begin. So, of course, I believe that Jesus was executed and then and then revived, like resurrected. And it's not just simply enough to believe it, but again, there is good scientific evidence, I believe, that shows that he not only was executed, but more importantly, what I believe is revived, which is, again, I feel like the biggest reason why he's some supernaturals, something greater than us. So what I like to first start off with is that when he resurrected, there were a lot of sensory details like related to him that simply just have to prove that he simply actually did revive. That all these different points and details are too specific to be more or or simply just too specific to show that people are just making it up. Like, so there are many tactile details in Matthew 28:9, Luke 24:30, John 20:22, and even Corinthians 15:37. In all of those passages, there are many details that very point out that all of these times when when Jesus resurrected, it couldn't be false or falsified. And also, like, I would also like to note the fact if Jesus simply rose up and all these people saw him, it's not actually similar to like the Marian apparitions. See, like Jake O'Connell actually gives in his novel, he actually gives a really good note on how Jesus's post resurrection is actually pretty different from the Marian apparitions, and it's not particularly the same to where it's like kind of strange, but in this case, it's actually quite different, and it's pretty good source as to why he's supernatural.
For what do I make of the evidence in the Bible more than just a human book? I interpret it as I don't see any necessarily divine nature in it. There's a lot of references to future events, but at the same time, a lot of them are very vague and not necessarily specific enough to determine this is a reference to a future act, especially considering these are also stories from people who have read all of the old texts. And if they're going to choose to make a statement about it, they're probably not going to say like things that are entirely unrelated. Like if you you're writing a story that's meant to be related to another story in some way, you are probably going to reference it several times. It's not unlikely that they likely read the Old Testament, as they were probably, many of the writers are actually Jewish, if I remember, as the disciples. But yeah, it's just not totally convincing as an idea, because it's just It's just so easy to get around logically, especially considering writing. Do I find the convincing of the four E's? They're interesting. Like the eyewitnesses, they have problems. The eyewitnesses has, they mentioned 500 people saw the events of the resurrection, but then they don't mention any of them, and it's kind of just reliant on on you agreeing with that first person. I feel like the letters from Paul, I believe it was, are much more convincing because it's establishes a closer idea that this is a thing going on very early, and so then you can't just say, well, they say they saw him. It's a lot closer to it. You have to prove a lot more of it. It's much more convincing of an idea.
For the four E's of the resurrection, the execution, the empty tomb, the early accounts, and the eyewitnesses, I find it very interesting and also compelling to the argument that Jesus rose from the dead, because there are many different types of evidence that connect to the resurrection, such as stories, and also primary sources from Romans, Christians, Jewish citizens, and also followers of Jesus. And I find this very interesting, how each of the people who say that Jesus died and also rose from the dead are all backed up by other people who are then backed up by other people, and it keeps spreading to tell the real story. And I believe that he actually did rise from the dead, and that the Shroud of Turin is actually real and can be carbon dated back to the resurrection day. And the reason why I find that compelling and why it actually connects to the resurrection is because the fire from the fire that happened and almost burned down the Shroud of Turin mostly affected the carbon dating, and it may have added another layer to it, which then dates that carbon, and therefore we can't get a complete accurate source. But I do believe that it connects back to it with all the hints on the cloth, such as the face, the body, the and everything about Jesus that shows up on the cloth. And I feel like this unit about God and Jesus rising from the dead connects back to the Aquinas unit, where, well, Aquinas was right. He had to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused cause, because you can't rise from the dead if you're not someone who has that power too. And, well, he's also convinced many people that he has rose from the dead and that he did miracles and created a lifestyle. And that's why I believe that Jesus rose from the dead and that he is God.